to have 15 minutes more time for that tomorrow. And there were some questions on which services can be, or which kind of traffic, if I may say, can be operated in amateur bands. So this is something I don't go too deep into that, but we are of opinion that perhaps any experimental work could be there. So it should be experimental, and still those university work on where they make some more studies, scientific studies there. So they may not be on long run be any more like amateur work. So, but there is something we should consider in the future. So I think this is enough for a moment. Tomorrow more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, well, truly, as I said, there is, on the poster sessions, for example, you will see a lot of information about many of the projects which are going on, and you'll have the opportunity to talk to people. There is also, last part of today's and tomorrow, a lot of presentations where you will have also an opportunity to get a little more in detail of many of the approach by some country and many information on some of those projects. But having said that, we have a few minutes for any questions. Please, you have a big audience there on the chair. Please take this opportunity. If you have any questions, it could be to how great is FCC, or how UK is battling with two bodies, or not battling, but at least how friend they are, or it could be of any of the approach in Finland, Holland, and also as seen from CalPoly and also Planet Labs, all the work which need to be done, how it's done. Please do not hesitate. Any question, please? Yes?
Thank you. I think there are even 3 bodies in the UK, and this relates to the Isle of Man. Can you say a few words about how you assess their activities and their role?
Need a microphone.
Okay. You can get with this one, yes.
Okay, thank you for the question. Well, first of all, I wanted to say to Yvonne that the 2 agencies in the UK are fully collaborating each other, are complementary, and we are happy to share the responsibility. To reply to your question that applies to the Isle of Man and to all the overseas territories, from the internal UK law, we are actually they are represented through Ofcom. So in the Isle of Man, the local regulator has to go through Ofcom, and then the Ofcom treat actually the Isle of Man like any other stakeholder in the UK, and then we provide the communication to the ITU like any other stakeholder. So in the UK and the UK overseas territory, there are only 2 bodies you have to relate to, Ofcom and the UK space agencies, and they are collaborating very much each other. Do you want to... Let's show this collaboration.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty well. And the other thing is we both have websites which have very extensive information on how you would apply for an Outer Space Act license and how you would apply for a spectrum filing. Part of the problem is getting people to understand that they need these things.
Sorry, I'll beat on the UK guys, but this is also for you. The conversation today is about small satellites, and one of the features of small satellites is some of them arrive in constellations. And the UK had an unhappy experience with a constellation a few years ago. And my question arising from that, I'm talking about ICO, is whether or not you're giving some thought as to whether, unlike larger satellites where you launch one network, one satellite, and you've got the network registered, whether constellations don't present a special case where, because there's such an asymmetry between what the network's intended to do and what it's actually doing with only 1 or 2 satellites. And that after what you went through with ICO, which is kind of painful, I suppose, you've given any thought to whether the rules should be changed so that launching one satellite doesn't bring into use an entire network.
Thank you for the question. This is a recurrent one, so I give my recurrent answer. We have internal rules in the UK, and we are revising them on a regular basis. My personal guess is that this rule will be consulted upon to be changed. Probably, I agree that it is quite tricky one. But of course, one thing I want to emphasize, at least this applies to the UK, from personal experience also to other legislation, to other countries. Whenever a stakeholder wants us to notify its network, we will review the information. It's not automatic. So the first guys you have to convince, if you are UK stakeholders, are these two guys and the relative teams and managers. And then if we are happy, then we notify the network. If we see that there is some kind of speculation in providing information for getting to a particular objective, of course, we will enforce our power to understand whether the applicant is legitimately used spectrum and other limited resources.
But there's been no modification to your procedures since the ICO thing, which dates now from several years ago. It didn't happen yesterday.
I can think of these consultations to come out very soon. So if you keep an eye on our website.
No, spectrum, it's your problem.
Thank you. Well, I would like to have some more information concerning the FCC process about small satellites. Well, can you tell us a little bit more, especially means that, well, if there is an FCC guidelines of small satellites, does it mean that we have a definition of what is a small satellite? Or is it in connection with the frequency bands? And well, I mean, it's two basic questions about the FCC process. Thank you.
Sure. So I think in 2013, the FCC put out a public paper on guidelines for small satellites for going through the process, and they talked about the difference between amateur versus experimental versus operational. And so they recognized that there's different categories. They didn't spend a lot of time being so particular with the definition of small satellite. I think that the implication of that paper are less than, for WRC matters, what the definition of a small satellite is. So it took them a while, but they did publish that paper, and it focused more on the experimental and the amateur. So, and then for operational satellites, there's all kinds of cases already out there of operational satellites that it doesn't matter the size, you go through the same process. So I know that the experimental route is much easier, and also the cost is much more attainable. So for instance, if you go an amateur route, it's free. If you go the experimental route, it's about $60. And then if you go the operational route, it's about $430,000. So it's a big jump, and so you can see why the smaller satellite projects are motivated to either go the amateur route or the experimental route, and so there's not a lot in between there, and I think that does contribute to some projects misusing or kind of operating in a gray zone of different frequency allocations, and so we're at a bit of an advantage because we're a commercial company with private backing, but I do commiserate with the pain of the in-between projects that it's not clear where they actually fall into.
I don't want to marketing, if I can, Ofcom. It's far from my aim here. But for example, the opposite scenario is the UK, where even largest satellite operators, they don't have to pay £1 for any spectrum right or for any spectrum regulatory procedure in the UK. So you can see that there are different regulators in the world.
Hi there, I'm Michael Johnson, as you can tell from my accent. You regulate me. Yeah, although it's true the Ofcom stuff, there's no charges, and the fees for the licenses in the UK are not that bad at 6,500. The big problem is the insurance requirement, the third-party liability insurance. So as a British citizen, we need to have 60 million euros worth of third-party cover for the length of the operational life of the spacecraft. And the cost of that premium is about 1% of the amount at risk, so that's 600,000 euros a year. So, for example, Voyager would still be paying 600,000 a year at the moment, 40 years on. So I speak as a regulatory refugee here. I've gone to the US to have to do my projects because I can't afford 600,000 euros a year for a CubeSat. I believe there are things in progress to try and solve that. Do we know what they might look like or when they might be happening?
Thanks, Michael. I guess that's one based for us. It's in progress is pretty much what I can say about that. We're looking at a possible system where if the satellite meets certain criteria, then that might be financed in a different way. But to explain why we have this requirement, the state is still liable by the Outer Space Act. So if you have a state that is not asking for insurance, that means taxpayers are the people who are taking on the burden, so the population. So it's a difference between does the operator of the satellite have the burden or does the general population of taxpayers carry the burden? And that's where that's sitting at the moment. So the 60 million euro, I think it's euro, not pounds, limitation is something that has come in. There's more work going on in that area.
Okay, thank you very much. That's something quite interesting, and I wouldn't like to see that coming on in the small sat and CubeSat approach. That type of thing that exists for the big satellite, for example, operators, where in fact it's in the hand of the big satellite operator to choose the regulator at the international level, which at some stage offers the best approach. And my feeling is that, okay, business is business and there's no problem to that, to be refugee or not refugee, I would say I agree. But there is also, beyond this approach, there is also responsibility by the notifying administration vis-à-vis the ITU, but also vis-à-vis all of the UN laws and the space laws, etc. And I think that it should not be forgotten. Again, the fact that if you go to some country, in a way you pay less than if you go in some other country. So that's one of the things. Having said that, I think that there will be a possibility to ask any other questions, well, during today's and tomorrow's, but also during this break, that will bring us up to 4 o'clock. So you will have not too much time for your coffee, but as I said, there should be a photo at 4 o'clock, just before we go in the... It's Sorry. Now. So Sorry. In fact, if I understand well, you will have a fewer minutes to take your coffee, but it's right now that the photo is taken. Please go on.
Because some important person leave because they have to go. That's why we are proposing now. Probably, thank you very much for the podium. We are kindly asking you return back to whatever seats, and the photographer will take a photo of all of us. Try to go more to the... We'll see what he will say.
Very good.
In the end,
yes. I was, yes. So I didn't get involved with it at all. It was just too difficult.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I haven't been. I've been approached by one guy.
Okay. Attention, smile.
not